President Donald Trump kept up his habit of making false claims in the first abbreviated week of 2019, starting the new year by dispensing a dizzying supply of factually dubious and outright false statements. Over the course of an hour-and-a-half-long press availability during his first cabinet meeting of 2019, the president offered a puzzling justification for the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, grossly inflated the cost of illegal immigration and the number of people in the country without proper documentation, claimed he essentially fired his former Secretary of Defense who actually resigned over policy disagreements with the Commander-in-Chief, and falsely claimed the U.S. spends more in Afghanistan in 1 month than he is requesting for his desired border wall. Trump's puzzling recollection of why the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and making the case that an unlimited timeline on military presence in Afghanistan serves only to damage the U.S., President Trump began to riff on an argument he often used during the 2016 campaign, pointing to the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Afghanistan made it Russia, because they went bankrupt fighting in Afghanistan, Trump said. Russia used to be the Soviet Union. While several historians reached by ABC News acknowledged that the Afghanistan war was costly for the USSR, there was considerable disagreement with the president's contention that the invasion contributed to the Soviet Union's collapse. No one can even remotely argue that the war in Afghanistan had anything to do with the breakup of the Soviet Union, said Sergei Radchenko, a professor of international politics at Cardiff University and global fellow at the Wilson Center. The Soviet Union fell apart partly because of runaway forces of centrifugal nationalism, which the particular structure of the Soviet state ironically enabled, and partly because certain political actors in the largest republics, especially Russia, sought to gain power by weakening the center's authority. It was only a small fraction of the Soviet overall defense expenditure, Radchenko added. Artemy Kalinovsky, an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam and research associate at the Cold War Studies program at the London School of Economics and Politics, largely agreed with Radchenko. The war was not a significant drain on the Soviet Union either in hard military terms or in fiscal terms, Kalinovsky told ABC. Reporting on the war in the late 1980s did contribute to political polarization, led to a more critical attitude towards the military on the part of the public, and helped alienate some of the military elite from Mikhail Gorbachev. But the Afghanistan war was not a major factor in the nationalist mobilizations of that era. In his cabinet meeting, Trump also made the argument that Russia invaded Afghanistan primarily because terrorists were going into Russia, adding, they were right to be there. Trump calls shutdown meeting productive while Democrats say he threatened to keep the government closed. For years Fact Check Friday, Trump's stocking full of falsehoods. The latter claimed that the USSR policy, especially considering the U.S. was right to invade Afghanistan, flies in the face of decades of past U.S. intervened in Afghanistan at the time to aid the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviets. That is obviously a big departure from the way U.S. policymakers, Democrats and Republicans, have ever talked about the Soviet intervention, Kalinovsky said. It is also not the way most Russians, including many military leaders, saw things, although recently there has been more of an effort to justify the initial intervention. The Soviet pretext at the time of the invasion was to offer support to the communist government in their fight against the anti-communist Mujahideen. To back up his belief that Soviet intervention was justified that truly perplexed historians. But it was the president's claim of terrorists going into the USSR. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was a complex affair, but the notion that some terrorists were infiltrating the USSR, this claim is utterly preposterous, Radchenko said. From Afghanistan has no basis in reality. When the Soviets intervened in Afghanistan, they were not worried about terrorism or Islamism of any sort, Kalinovsky added. They were mostly worried that an unstable Afghanistan would be an opportunity for the United States to threaten the USSR on its southern border. Andrew Hararpool, Getty Images. McMaster, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis attend a briefing in the Cabinet Room of the White House. Oct. File President Donald Trump, National Security Advisor H.R. 5, 2017, in Washington, D.C. Does illegal immigration cost the $250 billion each year? Near the beginning of the cabinet meeting, President Trump repeatedly stressed the need for a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border to curb illegal immigration, repeating a claim he made in a tweet about 1 month prior. He argued that if Congress provided him with his demands for $5.6 billion in border wall funding, it would pay for itself in a month or two. Because we lose pretty close to $250 billion on illegal immigration, and I would say that it could be on a monthly, or a couple of months, it would pay for the wall, pay for what we're talking about. But that claim isn't true, Trump said. The White House did not immediately respond to questions asking for clarity on where the president first discovered this statistic, but of multiple independent analyses measuring the economic costs of illegal immigration, none come close to the $250 billion figure floated by Trump. A 2013 report from the Conservative Heritage Foundation estimated that undocumented immigrant households cost the U.S. around $54.5 billion per year in net fiscal burden. And a 2017 report from the Center for Immigration Studies, which typically advocates for aggressive measures to curb illegal immigration. Imagine the following scenario of the wall paying for itself as the president has described. If a border wall stopped between 160,000 and 200,000 illegal crossers, 9 to 12% of those expected to successfully cross in the next decade, the fiscal savings would equal the $12 to $15 billion cost of the wall. But that estimate is still far away from the $250 billion the president claims that illegal immigration costs the U.S., the study said, per year. Trump falsely claims 30 to 35 million undocumented immigrants are living in U.S. President Trump also used his extended time in front of cameras to make a claim widely inflating the current number of undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. Look, when you hear, "I've been hearing 11 million. I've been 12 million. I've been hearing 35 million, Trump said. It would always stay right at 11. Trump added, "It's probably 30, 35 million people. But that claim is false. I used to hear 11 million Albanian leks the time." Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, testifying before the House Oversight Committee on December 20, said her department currently estimates there are somewhere between 11 million and 22 million undocumented immigrants currently residing in the U.S. Pew researchers have generated much more conservative estimates, however, releasing research that they claim shows the number of undocumented immigrants has actually decreased leading up to 2016 from its peak of 12.2 million in 2007. Trump attempts to revise how and why Mattis departed. President Trump was the first to announce by Twitter last month that James Mattis would be retiring as Secretary of Defense. And officials within the administration made clear at the time that Mattis' resignation was not forced but a decision he made of his own accord. But at Wednesday's cabinet meeting, President Trump sought to change that narrative by asserting he essentially fired Mattis. President Obama fired him, and essentially, so did I, Trump said, criticizing Mattis' management of the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan, where President Trump is now weighing a troop drawdown. Not too good. What's he done for me? How has he done in Afghanistan? Not too good. And I shouldn't be happy, Trump said. I'm not happy with what he's done in Afghanistan. Trump's attempt to change the story comes after a vast body of reporting that Mattis resigned in protest over his strong disagreements with the president's announced decision to withdraw troops from Syria within 30 days, a timetable the president has since walked back to allow for a more gradual drawdown. In his resignation letter made public, Mattis did not hide his philosophical disagreements with the president, writing, "Because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position." AFP Getty Images. Phil S. Marines keep watch as unseen Afghan National Army soldiers participate in a training exercise at the Sharab military camp in Lashkar Gah in the Afghan province of Helmand, OG. Trump claims the U.S. spends more in a month in Afghanistan the total cost of border wall. Trump also argued that the U.S. 2017 spends more in 1 month in Afghanistan than the $5.6 billion figure he's demanding for a southern border wall in the ongoing shutdown fight. "We spend in Afghanistan more in 1 month than what we're talking about for the wall," Trump said, citing the $5.6 billion figure he's requesting. Last February, Pentagon official Randall Shriver testified that the war in Afghanistan cost about $45 billion each year. But his numbers are off. So, while the U.S. That would put the monthly cost of the Afghan war at $3.75. Is still spending a considerable amount in Afghanistan on a monthly basis. It is below the $5.6 billion figure cited by the president.